Hi there, this is John for killerphp.com, and what I'm going to be doing today is looking at how we can essentially finish up our whole exercise in persistence and look how we can echo various users from our site and how we can manage the insertion of all of these people and so on and so forth. And we're going to finish it by passing a callback, and that callback function is going to be running through our session variables. So we've got a couple of things happening here. Basically, just like in this example where we've got a function that we've defined and we've passed that function into a list of keys that are set, now instead of looking at a list of keys that are set, we're going to create a new list of people that basically want to learn PHP. And so in the welcome action, or rather in the default action, in the main area of the page, if you put your first name and your last name and your address, and you hit save, then it'll add you to this list. And then in learn PHP action, what we're going to see is we're going to see the list of all those users. And for each one of those users, we're going to be running a function that we've defined over here. And what's neat about that is, of course, we could change the function based on input. We could have the function behave dynamically. And we're going to pass that through as a callback. And then in the following video, we are going to look at how we can shift this on its head and re-implement some of this functionality using something called the observer pattern, which is very popular in MVC applications. So let's get started. The first thing I want to do is I want to look at the existing site and how it functions. So right now, we've only got two actions to worry about. We've got one which is the default action of the index controller, where I can put in a bunch of information and hit submit, and I can see which keys are being set in my particular class. And then in my index controller and my welcome action, I can see that there are two users that are registered that want to learn PHP. So what's neat about this whole approach is that we can easily get these users and then render them to the view. So you'll notice that our view code so far has actually been our controller code has actually been pretty slim. And we're trying to limit the amount of code here that is view specific. And it's really intended to handle things like requests, validation, making sure that the data has got a certain amount of integrity, and then passing that data along to the model so that the model can make sure that those business rules, whether or not a set is, whether there's one user or many users or checking the existence of a user, all of these things can happen within the actual model. So in the learn PHP action, I'm going to have two things. I'm going to have a text box to check to see if a user wants to learn PHP. And then I'm going to have a list of all the people that want to learn PHP. So I'm going to have a variable here called PHP users or PHP learners. And it'll just be a string. And then in the learn PHP action, instead of saying learn.learnphp.php, I'll say the following people want to learn PHP. And then we'll echo this learn PHP learners. So for now, this is going to be empty. I'm also going to create a form with an input type submit, value equals search, and input type text, value equals query, or let's say search query. And actually that's not the value. We want the name to be that, and we also want the ID to be that. It's generally a good practice to make sure that your names and your IDs are the same value when you're creating text boxes. So if I go to index/learn PHP, then I'll have the following people want to learn PHP, and it's going to be empty so far. So now we need to pass the PHP learners into the view. So I'll go back to my index controller, and it's really as simple as saying kp_models_user get all. So this will get me all my users. And then for each users as user, this PHP learners, and then we'll concatenate, and we'll say user render with this get definition list func. Let's see what happens. Oh, this has to be a function. Great. So at the bottom here, I've got the following people that want to learn PHP. So John Lebensold and Jane Roberts. This isn't the prettiest view, but what's neat about this is that I can change that view inside the controller here. So if I don't want it to be a definition list, if I just want it to be a paragraph, then I could just change this to a paragraph, and I could get rid of the key and maybe add a space, and then I would have John Levensold and Vancouver, BC, Jane Roberts. And if I didn't want that, I could also render it using the toString method that we've already defined. And instead, we could actually take that set and pass it through the definition list. So what's neat about this is that we've got options, and any of them can be used depending on the situation that we're in. So that was easy. The next step is our little search engine. So let's say our search engine is very, very primitive. All it can do is search for first name and last name. So I want to check to see if somebody wants to search. So I'll say if is set request search query, then we want to start the search engine. Else, we'll just list all the users. Put that there, put that there, and take this code right here and put it here, and there we go. So what's nice about this is that we've basically isolated our control flow. So if the search query is set and we've actually put something in it, if the string length is greater than 0, then we want to start the search engine. What does that look like? Well, it's going to still be a list of PHP learners, and we still want to get each one of those users that match the search engine. So this actually is going to be the same. I'm going to put that down here. What's going to be different, though, is that instead of doing users, kp models, user get all, I'm actually going to run a search engine query. So I'll just say users, and then I'll say search request search query. Now, it's just important to note at this point that if you were doing a enterprise application or any kind of application really, that you would want to escape your strings, and you'd want to make sure that somebody can't inject HTML or JavaScript or any kind of SQL statements inside of your search requests, or any kind of text box for that matter. So one way of mitigating this is to use prepared statements if you're using a database technology like MySQL, or to also look at frameworks like Doctrine or ZendDB or Propel, which are all excellent database abstraction layers. And if you're not into that, then just looking at various ways of escaping strings using strip tags and checking to see if if you've got SQL statements in your search boxes. But that's a whole different topic. So in order to run this search function, we need to define it in our user model. And what's interesting about this is that the user model is responsible for data gathering and managing things like this, whereas the controller is interested in the control flow of the application, and the view is interested in how the thing looks. So everything is all nicely separated out. So if we go back to the user function here, and at the top we've got our static function, so I'll keep going with that convention, and I'll create a public function, public static function called search. And we'll take in a query. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get the users. So I'm going to get all the users, and I'm going to say self get all. This is the same thing as running user get all, except that because I'm in the class, I can just say self get all. And for each users as user, and we'll create a result set, which will be an array. If str, in other words, if the string contains, if the user first name contains the query, and we'll make it, we'll do it all lowercase. And actually we can do this a little better. So that'll do case insensitive. Then the result set will have one copy of the user. And then we will return the result set. So if we go back here, if I type in John, please implement a function called, oh, very important. The reason this happened is because I didn't set the form method to post. So then the controller broke down and everything else broke down. So we have to make sure that our form is set to post. So if I go back to the Learn PHP search engine, we have to say that we want our method to be post. So if I type in John, then I'm just going to get John. If I type in Jane, then I'm going to get Jane. So we can see that our search engine works for first name, and it could easily be extended to work for last name as well, and so on and so forth. But the point of this is that it's actually very easy for you to organize your control flow using the MVC framework. Any MVC framework. Doesn't need to, it can even be your own, but it's probably best to work with whatever's out there. So thanks for listening. In the next video, we're going to kind of shape this a little differently. We're going to create an observer pattern, which will be another way that we can look at how MVC frameworks are implemented and how they're currently implemented in desktop applications as well as web applications. And you'll find the observer pattern in a lot of frameworks and in a lot of areas, so it's a great pattern to know and to be familiar with. Thanks for listening.